The sun's cruel embrace. The sun was a malevolent eye, searing down on Alara Vance, who was bound tightly to a weather-beaten pole. Her wrists, raw and chafed, screamed in protest against the coarse ropes. The air shimmered, a distorted mirage of heat rising from the parched earth, and the only sound was the distant, mocking caw of a raven. Her throat was a desert itself, each swallow a painful rasp. Silas had left her here, a cruel monument to his rage, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the gnawing certainty of his utter contempt. It hadn't always been this way. She remembered the crisp, sea-salted air of the ship that brought her across the ocean, a world away from the dusty, sun-baked hell she now inhabited. The promise of America, of a new life, had been a beacon. The carefully penned letters from Silas Blackwood had painted a picture of a hard-working rancher, a man seeking a gentle hand to share his life. She had envisioned a small, neat cabin, perhaps a garden, and the quiet comfort of a shared existence. Hope, fragile and tenacious, had bloomed in her heart like a desert rose after a rare rain. The journey west had been long, rattling her bones and her naive expectations. When Silas had finally met her, his smile had been too wide, his eyes too sharp, like a wolf assessing its prey. The initial kindness had evaporated like dew in the morning sun, replaced by a possessiveness that tightened its grip with each passing day. He demanded obedience, swift and unquestioning, and any deviation, however slight, was met with a chilling fury. Yesterday, it had been a dropped bucket, water spilling onto the dry ground. A minor accident, yet Silas had seen it as defiance, a deliberate act of waste. His face, usually a mask of cold indifference, had contorted into a snarl. "You think you can waste my water, little bird," he'd hissed, his voice low and menacing. He'd dragged her out, past the ramshackle cabin, past the few stunted Joshua trees, until they reached this isolated spot. The ropes had cut into her flesh even then, a prelude to the torture of the sun. He'd stared at her, a glint of sadistic pleasure in his eyes, before turning his horse and riding away without a backward glance. "A day or two, little bird, you'll learn to appreciate what you have," he'd called out, his voice swallowed by the vast emptiness. Now, hours later, the heat was an oppressive weight, pressing down, stealing her breath. Her lips were cracked, her vision blurring at the edges. A fly buzzed relentlessly around her face, a tiny tormentor. Panic, a cold serpent, coiled in her stomach. How long could she last? Days? Hours? She closed her eyes, trying to conjure the image of a cool stream, of shade, anything to escape the scorching reality. But even her imagination offered no solace, only the relentless, cruel embrace of the sun. A speck on the horizon. The sun, a malevolent eye, beat down upon Alara. Her skin, already raw from days of exposure, prickled and burned. Each breath was a shallow gasp, tasting of dust and despair. The ropes, woven from coarse hemp, had long since chafed through the initial layers of skin, now biting into muscle. Her wrists throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, mirroring the emptiness in her stomach. She sagged against the splintered wood of the pole, her head lolling, the world blurring at the edges. A fly, persistent and buzzing, landed on her cheek, but she lacked the energy to even twitch. This, she knew, was how it ended. Not with a bang, but with the slow, agonizing surrender of a body pushed beyond its limits. Then, a flicker. A disturbance on the shimmering horizon, where the ochre earth met the hazy blue sky. At first, she dismissed it as a mirage, another trick of the heat-addled mind. But the speck grew, slowly, steadily, resolving into the unmistakable silhouette of a rider. A horseman. Her heart, which she'd thought had shriveled to a husk, gave a faint, hopeful tremor. Desperate, she tried to rouse herself, to make some sign, but her voice was a croak, her movements feeble. The figure continued to approach, a dark, solitary silhouette against the vast, indifferent landscape. The rhythmic thud of hooves became audible, a distant drumbeat against the silence. Jesse, astride his dun mare, watched the woman tied to the pole. His gaze, usually veiled, was sharp and assessing. The mare, Belle, snorted, her ears swiveling. He'd seen plenty of desolate sights in his years, but this was different. She was slumped, her blonde hair matted, a tattered dress clinging to her emaciated frame. Even from this distance, he could see the angry red welts on her wrists. A cruel joke, a slow death sentence. He slowed Belle to a walk, his hand instinctively resting on the worn grip of his Colt. Caution, not fear, guided him. The desert held many traps, many desperate souls. But this woman, she seemed beyond desperation. She was a picture of utter defeat. He saw her head lift slightly, her eyes, though distant, fixating on him. There was no fear in them, only a profound weariness. As he drew closer, the details became stark, the sun-cracked lips, the swollen face, the raw skin. Her breathing was ragged, shallow. She was fading, like a campfire in the dawn. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through her body. He nudged Belle forward, his gaze never leaving her. A hand of mercy. The sun beat down with relentless ferocity, baking the already parched earth to a brittle crisp. Jesse dismounted, his boots kicking up fine, red dust that coated everything. The horse, a sturdy bay named Juniper, snorted and pawed at the ground, eager for the shade that was nowhere to be found. Jesse's gaze swept over the desolate landscape, settling on the figure tied to the rough-hewn pole. He could see the shimmer of heat rising from her, a distortion in the air around her sun-baked skin. Her head was bowed, the blonde hair a pale halo against the dark wood. He noted the makeshift bonds, crudely tied but effective, digging into her wrists and ankles. He approached slowly, his spurs a soft jingle in the otherwise silent air. The only sound was the buzz of unseen insects and the labored rasp of his own breath. He drew a canteen from his saddlebag, its metal glinting. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. He didn't expect a response, and he didn't get one. Her body was stiff, unmoving, a statue of despair. Kneeling, Jesse took out his knife. The blade gleamed briefly before he carefully sliced through the ropes binding her wrists. The twine, rough and abrasive, fell away, leaving angry red welts on her skin. He did the same for her ankles, working with a practiced efficiency that spoke of countless similar tasks. As the last rope gave way, Elara stumbled forward, her legs weak from disuse and the intense heat. Jesse caught her arm, his grip firm but gentle, steadying her before she could collapse. "Here," he offered, extending the canteen. The cool metal pressed against her trembling hand. Elara flinched, her eyes, the color of a stormy sky, darting up to meet his. Distrust, deep and ingrained, clouded them. She didn't take the canteen immediately, her gaze lingering on his calloused fingers, then traveling to the glint of the knife still in his other hand. It was a silent question, a desperate plea for understanding. Jesse understood. He sheathed the knife slowly, deliberately, making sure she saw the movement. "Water," he repeated, his voice softer this time, devoid of any demand. "You need it." Her lips were cracked and dry, her throat undoubtedly raw. The offer hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge of unexpected kindness in a world that had offered her little else. She hesitated for another long moment, her eyes searching his for any hint of deceit, any flicker of the cruelty she had come to expect. Finally, with a small, almost imperceptible nod, she reached out and took the canteen, her fingers brushing his. Words in the dust. The sun, a relentless eye in the vast, pale sky, beat down, turning the air into a shimmering haze. Jesse knelt a few feet from Elara, his silhouette a stark, comforting line against the glare. The rope lay coiled in the dust, a discarded serpent. He kept his voice low, a gravelly murmur that barely disturbed the stillness. "No need to be scared. You're safe now." Elara flinched, pulling her knees tighter to her chest, her gaze darting from him to the endless horizon and back again. Her blonde hair, sun-bleached and tangled, obscured part of her face, but he could see the tremor in her hands, the way her shoulders hunched. A raw, exposed nerve. He understood that kind of fear, the deep-seated kind that clawed at your insides long after the immediate danger was gone. He didn't move closer, respecting the invisible wall she'd built around herself. "I won't hurt you," he continued, choosing his words carefully, each one a stone laid on a treacherous path. "Just trying to help." He gestured vaguely to the west. "There's a town, couple days' ride. It's got a doctor, a general store. People." The word people seemed to hang in the air, weighted with both promise and peril. Ilara's eyes, a startling blue against the dust and fatigue, fixed on him for a moment, an unreadable mix of suspicion and a faint, flickering hope. Her throat worked, but no sound emerged. She wanted to believe him, desperately. The ache in her wrists, the parched dryness of her mouth, the gnawing emptiness in her stomach, all screamed for relief, for an end to this brutal solitude. But the memory of betrayal was a sharp thorn, a constant reminder of how quickly kindness could turn to cruelty. Jessie picked up a small stone, idly tracing lines in the dirt. "My name's Jessie. Folks call me Dust sometimes." He paused, letting the information settle. "I'm heading that way anyway. Can take you with me. Make sure you get there all right." He watched her, a silent observer. Her gaze drifted to his horse, a sturdy bay with a patient demeanor, then to the saddlebags, the canteen hanging from the pommel. He could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, weighing the known terror of being alone against the unknown uncertainty of trusting a stranger. The desert was a harsh mistress, quick to claim the lost. Staying here meant almost certain death. Going with him meant a chance, however slim, at survival. Finally, she whispered, her voice a reedy rasp, "Why?" Jessie met her gaze, his own eyes steady, unwavering. "Because it's the right thing to do." He offered a small, almost imperceptible nod towards the setting sun, its last rays painting the sky in fiery hues. "We should get moving before nightfall. It gets cold out here." The long road ahead. The sun, a malevolent eye, beat down on the endless expanse of sand and rock. Ilara, astride the mare, felt every jolt reverberate through her already aching body. Jessie rode silently beside her on his bay, his gaze fixed on the shimmering horizon. Dust, fine as flour, coated everything, clinging to their clothes, gritting between their teeth. Their pace was agonizingly slow, each step of the horses a deliberate, measured effort against the relentless heat. Hours bled into one another. Ilara's throat was a parched canyon, her lips cracked and stinging. She hadn't dared ask for water, remembering the scarcity of their escape. Jessie, however, seemed to sense her need. Without a word, he pulled a worn canteen from his saddlebag, uncorked it, and offered it to her. The cool metal against her palm felt like a lifeline. She drank sparingly, letting the water coat her tongue before swallowing, the taste pure and life-giving. When she handed it back, he nodded, taking a small sip himself before recorking it. He repeated the gesture a few hours later, and then again as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple. This time, he also pulled a piece of dried jerky from a pouch, tearing it in half and offering her the larger portion. Ilara hesitated. Her stomach growled in protest, but years of having to earn every morsel, or worse, being denied it, made her wary. Jessie simply held it out, his expression unreadable. Slowly, she reached for it. The salty, tough meat was a welcome reprieve from the gnawing emptiness. They made camp as twilight deepened, the desert air cooling to a crisp bite. Jessie dismounted, unsaddled the horses, and set about gathering what little scrub brush they could find for a small, economical fire. Ilara watched him, a silent observer. He moved with an efficient grace, his quiet focus a stark contrast to the volatile men she'd known. He didn't look at her, didn't demand anything, just performed the necessary tasks. When the fire was a steady glow, casting dancing shadows, he unrolled a bedroll near the flames, then another a short distance away. He gestured to the second one. "It'll be cold tonight." Elara hesitated, then moved to the bedroll, settling down. The ground, even through the canvas, was hard, but the warmth of the fire was a blessing. Jesse sat across from her, chewing slowly on his own jerky. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but simply present. Elara found herself studying his profile in the firelight, the strong jawline, the slight stubble, the depth in his eyes when he occasionally glanced her way. There was no judgment there, no demand, just a quiet, unwavering presence. With each shared sip of water, each bite of food, a tiny fissure appeared in the hardened shell around her heart, allowing a sliver of something akin to trust to seep in. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't entirely alone. Rattler's return. The sun, a relentless forge, hammered down on the parched earth. Elara, her blonde hair dusted with the trail's grit, leaned against a sun-baked rock, her eyes scanning the shimmering horizon. A small, carefully tended fire crackled beside them, a defiance against the vast, empty landscape. Jesse, a dark silhouette against the fiery sky, was meticulously checking the saddle on his horse, his movements economical and practiced. The silence was deep, broken only by the crackle of the flames and the distant cry of a hawk. Elara closed her eyes, the image of Silas's sneering face still a phantom in her mind, a chill that had nothing to do with the desert's cooling breath. A sudden, sharp crack rent the air, followed by a whizzing sound that buried itself in the sand just inches from Jesse's boot. He dropped to a crouch, hand already on his revolver. "Down, Elara," he barked, his voice tight with urgency. Before Elara could fully react, a chorus of hoots and jeers erupted from the cluster of thorny brush on the ridge above them. Silas Blackwood, a grin splitting his scarred face, stepped into view, flanked by two of his rough-looking men. The glint of sun on a rifle barrel was a stark, terrifying beacon. "Well, well, if it ain't my little bird, flown the coop with a stray dog," Silas sneered, his voice a venomous rasp that scraped across Elara's nerves. He slowly descended the rocky slope, his boots crunching on loose stone. "Thought you could just ride off into the sunset, did you, Elara? Leave old Silas high and dry?" He gestured with his rifle, its muzzle pointing casually at Jesse. "And you, cowboy? Stealing another man's property? That ain't very neighborly." Jesse remained silent, his eyes fixed on Silas, assessing the threat, calculating the odds. His hand never left the grip of his pistol. Silas chuckled, a low, guttural sound. "No words for a rattlesnake, huh? Smart. But not smart enough. You see, I knew you'd head this way. Always predictable, you too. Always looking for the easy path." He stopped a few yards away, his gaze lingering on Elara, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "Thought I'd let you stew a bit, thinking you were free. Makes the reunion all the sweeter." He raised his rifle slightly, aiming it squarely at Jesse. "Now, I reckon we can do this the easy way, or the hard way. You hand over the girl and that fancy horse, and maybe, just maybe, I'll let you ride off with your life. What do you say, Dust? A desert standoff." The sun beat down with relentless ferocity, baking the already cracked earth. A lone cloud of dust on the horizon heralded their arrival, growing steadily larger, steadily more ominous. Elara, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, instinctively pressed closer to Jesse, a silent plea in her wide, fearful eyes. Jesse's hand, calloused and firm, found hers, a quiet reassurance in the face of the encroaching threat. Silas Blackwood, astride a powerful sorrel, led the charge. His sneer was visible even from a distance, a cruel twist of his lips beneath a wide-brimmed hat. 4 other riders flanked him, their faces grim, their hands resting on the butts of their revolvers. They pulled their horses to a skidding halt a dozen yards away, kicking up a final cloud of grit that stung Elara's eyes. "Well, well, if it isn't my wayward little bride," Silas drawled, his voice a low, venomous hiss that slithered through the hot air. His gaze lingered on Alara, a possessive hunger in his dark eyes before flicking to Jesse. "And you, friend? You got a name, or are you just a buzzard circling my property?" Jesse's jaw tightened. "The woman ain't your property, Silas. She's free." His voice was calm, a stark contrast to the coiled tension in his posture. Silas threw back his head and laughed, a harsh, grating sound that grated on Alara's nerves. "Free? Is that what she told you? Don't believe everything a woman says, stranger. Especially not one as troublesome as Alara." He gestured with a gloved hand. "Now, hand her over, and maybe we can avoid any unnecessary unpleasantness." Alara felt a wave of icy dread wash over her. She knew Silas. Knew the unpleasantness he spoke of. Her grip on Jesse's hand tightened to a painful degree. Jesse's eyes, usually so distant, now held a steely glint. "She's not going anywhere with you." The air crackled. Silas's smile vanished, replaced by a cold fury. "Fool! You truly think you can stand against me?" He made a subtle, almost imperceptible nod to one of his men, a burly figure with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. The man's hand went for his holster. But before his fingers even brushed the leather, Jesse's right hand moved. A blur. The crack of a pistol echoed across the desert, sharp and sudden. The burly man stumbled back, a crimson stain blossoming on his chest, and crumpled to the ground, his own weapon still holstered. Alara gasped, her eyes wide with shock and a strange, burgeoning awe. She had seen men fight, but never with such blinding speed, such deadly precision. It was over before she fully registered it. Silas stared, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. "You shot him. You goddamn varmint!" he bellowed, drawing his own weapon. "Another shot. Quick, clean." Silas's gun flew from his grasp, his hand jerking back with a yelp of pain. He clutched his palm, blood seeping between his fingers. The remaining 3 men, momentarily stunned, hesitated, their bravado evaporating in the face of Jesse's lethal efficiency. Jesse leveled his revolver at them, the barrel still faintly smoking. "Anyone else feeling lucky?" His voice was low, devoid of emotion, but carried a weight that silenced the desert. The 3 men exchanged nervous glances, then, as one, slowly raised their hands, their faces pale beneath the dust. The retreat of the Rattler. Jesse's rifle cracked, a sharp retort that carved through the canyon's silence, instantly met by Silas's enraged bellow. The bandit leader, caught in mid-stride, stumbled, clutching his shoulder. A dark blossom of crimson rapidly stained his dust-caked shirt. Jesse had aimed for the arm, a clear warning, but Silas's wild flailing had shifted the impact point. "You son of a bitch!" Silas shrieked, his face a mask of pain and disbelief. His men, momentarily stunned, held their rifles steady on Jesse, but a palpable shift had occurred. The predatory glint in Silas's eyes had faltered, replaced by a flicker of raw fear. Jesse offered no words, simply reloaded with a practiced, almost languid motion, the metallic click a stark pronouncement in the abrupt quiet. His gaze, steady and unwavering, swept over the remaining outlaws. They registered the cold resolve in his eyes, the silent promise of further retribution should they press. They saw that Silas, for all his bluster, was now wounded, vulnerable. The Rattler had been struck. "Get back!" Silas roared, his voice hoarse, though the command now lacked its customary bite. He retreated, stumbling on the uneven ground, his men melting in behind him, their bravado dissolving like mist beneath a rising sun. The desert, which had moments before seemed to hold them captive, now beckoned as a desperate avenue of escape. They scrambled onto their horses in a disorganized frenzy, hooves kicking up plumes of red dust as they galloped away, Silas clutching his shoulder and casting a venomous backward glance at Jesse. The Rattler, indeed, was in retreat, leaving behind only the lingering memory of his malice and the fading scent of gunpowder. Ilara, who had cowered behind the meager shelter of a saguaro, slowly straightened. Her heart still hammered against her ribs, but the immediate terror had receded, replaced by a profound sense of relief. She watched the dust cloud dwindle in the distance, a tangible sign of their deliverance. Jesse lowered his rifle, the tension in his shoulders finally slackening. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You all right?" She nodded, her voice a little shaky. "Yes. Thank you, Jesse." Her gratitude was immense, a silent, weighty presence. She no longer counted the times he had saved her, but each instance chipped away at the hard shell around her heart. Jesse merely grunted, holstering his rifle. He walked to their horses, checking saddles and water skins. The air was still, save for the whisper of wind through the dry grasses. The desert's harshness remained, but the immediate threat had vanished. They had faced the darkness and emerged, not unscathed, but together. "Let's go," he said, his voice low, pulling himself into his saddle. Ilara mounted her own horse, her movements more confident now. The sun beat down, relentless, but a new dawn, however faint, was breaking over their desolate journey. They continued westward, leaving the retreating Rattler and his bruised pride behind, the silence between them now one of shared resilience rather than lingering fear. A new horizon. The scent of wood smoke, mingled with the earthy aroma of damp soil and something sweet, perhaps baked goods, drifted on the breeze. It was a fragrance Ilara hadn't encountered in weeks, a stark contrast to the dust and sagebrush that had been her constant companions. She squinted, her eyes adjusting to the shifting light as they topped a low rise. Below them, nestled in a shallow valley, lay a cluster of buildings. Not just a lonely outpost, but a real town. A murmur of voices, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer, and the faint whinny of a horse reached them. Ilara felt a tremor run through her, a mix of apprehension and exhilaration. She glanced at Jesse, whose gaze was fixed on the burgeoning settlement. His expression remained unreadable, as it often did, but the slight tightening around his eyes suggested a similar internal shift. "Looks like a proper place," she said, her voice a little breathy. He nodded slowly. "Cedar Creek. Heard tell it's grown some since I last passed through." He dismounted, his movements economical, then offered a hand. Ilara slid down from the saddle, her legs feeling strangely heavy after so many days astride. She stretched, feeling the ache in her muscles, but a new kind of energy was surging through her veins. As they walked the final stretch, the sounds grew louder, more distinct. Children's laughter, the rumble of a wagon, a saloon piano playing a jaunty tune. Ilara felt her shoulders relax, a tension she hadn't realized she was carrying finally easing its grip. The thought of a warm meal, a soft bed, and a place where she wasn't constantly scanning the horizon for danger was almost overwhelming. They reached the edge of town, the dirt track widening into a main street lined with wooden storefronts. A general store, a livery stable, a saloon with swinging doors, and a small church steeple peeking above the rooftops. People moved about, going about their lives, oblivious to the journey Ilara and Jesse had just completed. Ilara stopped, turning to face Jesse. The gratitude that welled within her was too vast for words. He had found her tied to that post, a forgotten thing under the scorching sun, and he had brought her here. He hadn't asked for anything, hadn't treated her with anything but quiet respect. He had seen a survivor, not a victim. "Jesse," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. For everything." He met her gaze, his blue eyes holding a depth she was only just beginning to understand. "No need, Ilara. We got here, that's what matters." A new horizon, indeed. The phrase resonated in her mind. No longer alone, no longer bound by fear or the past, she stood on the precipice of a future she could choose. Jesse, her silent protector, her unexpected companion, was by her side. She looked at the bustling street, at the faces passing by, and a faint smile touched her lips. The scars remained, a part of her story, but they no longer defined her. Here, in Cedar Creek, with Jessie, she could finally begin to live. "So," she said, a lightness in her tone she hadn't known she possessed, "where do we start?" Jessie gestured towards a modest building with a sign that read boarding house. "First, we get you cleaned up. Then, we eat. After that," he paused, a hint of a smile playing on his lips, "we figure out what's next."